See you on the other side, I guess.
All right.
All right, everyone, we're about to go live on YouTube.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City of Helena City Commission Administrative Meeting. This meeting is called to order. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission meeting. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's effort to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public commentary during this meeting. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
City Attorney Joden,
Here.
City Manager Harlow Schulk,
Here.
Commissioner Halliday. No, hold on, Mr. Mayor, he may be in the attendees. He is. I apologize, Commissioner. For the record, I've moved Commissioner Halliday over to the panelists.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dean,
Here.
Commissioner Logan,
Here.
Commissioner O'Loughlin,
Here.
Mayor Collins.
Here. At this time, I want to say that we will be rearranging the agenda a little bit. Item 3 Bravo, item 3B will be moved to the end of the discussion item. It will now be at 5 Bravo, 5B. Recommendations from Helena Citizens Council, Nancy Perry.
Mr. Mayor, I don't see Ms. Perry on the meeting currently.
Do we have a representative from the Helena Citizens Council present to provide the recommendation?
I have no hands raised in the attendees, Mr. Mayor, so
Okay, we'll move along. City Manager's report, City Manager Performance Review Criteria Discussion. Is that from the Ms. McMahon?
Yes. I think she's having a struggle with her camera, but I see her. Mayor.
Okay,
Good afternoon, Commissioner and City Manager and Mayor.
good afternoon.
City Manager, did you want me to carry this conversation or did you want to introduce it?
Thank you. I would love to introduce Renee McMahon, who is our Human Resources Director. She is our newest director, and this is my first time through with you all. As you know, we are all learning. I'm learning that the process for my review requires that we agree on a method of approach, and that I believe is how this item got added to the agenda and why we're talking about it today. And Renee is our lead to you all, and I'm going to turn it over to Renee. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Mayor and Commissioners, as City Manager Rachel Harlow Schulk just explained, the contract between the Commissioners and our City Manager does require a 6-month evaluation and then an annual evaluation thereafter, and then 1 year increments after this initial 6 months and 12-month reviews. Part of that contract agreement is that the Commissioners and the City Manager must discuss that performance criteria that will be included in her evaluation process. So I did forward some draft documents. I suggested to the Commission and to the Mayor and to the City Manager that we have 2 parts of this evaluation process, both including a self-evaluation by the City Manager and then an evaluation collectively to provide to the City Manager based on that criteria. 2 parts, meaning 1, assessment of current goals, the status of the achievement of current goals, and then 2, some performance components that we commonly look for in leaders, such as working for the vision of the Commission, providing support and leadership to the team, the city staff, to the Commission, professional judgments, qualitative analysis, those kinds of performance criteria. Again, to include not only her self-evaluation, but also the commission's collective evaluation. So I'll turn it over to the mayor, commissioners, and city manager to carry any other discussion or recommendations you may have to the documents that I've submitted as suggested performance review criteria as required in the current contract.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Comments, questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
I just have one, and I really appreciate Renee's work on this, and I'm in agreement with what's included in here. The one part that clarification would be helpful, or if we could have maybe like a supplemental item with it, is on goal 3. We have established strong working relationships with department directors and city staff. And I'm wondering if there is a mechanism that we could maybe get better feedback on how that relationship and it is being built. And I don't know if that could happen maybe through, various interviews by Renee of particular staff, and then maybe a summary provided to us. But I'm just trying to think of, some way where we could get a better idea of that actual establishment of the working relationship, because I don't think we all necessarily have that view into that relationship, since we, are working directly through the manager. So that would be helpful to have some sort of mechanism to have that information.
Are there particular departments that you want? I'm open to that, just to offer that up as well, Mayor.
I actually think it might be cool if we could have, a handful of different departments, but also different levels of staffing. So not just a director perspective, but, different staff levels as well. And I don't think it needs to be, an exhaustive thing. And I don't know if the manager has thoughts on this, but I think kind of like a variety of inputs would be helpful, just to give us a better idea of, how those relationships are being built, or, where we need to, find areas of improvement, or expansion, whatever. But I think that having various inputs would be helpful.
Mayor, may I ask just a procedural question real
Please
fast?
go ahead, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Maybe this perhaps is a question for the city attorney. The extent to it, I'm just trying to remember how we've done evaluations of city managers in the past, and the extent to which we go into executive session. I don't know that we need to do it today, but I am just wondering procedurally how much of a conversation about performance perhaps should be done in executive session versus sort of a public outward facing, here are the goals that we're setting forward. I don't know. Can you help me remember what we've done in the past?
Sure. Mayor, Commissioner O'Loughlin, commissioners. The commission has historically conducted the core evaluation of the manager in closed executive session, which I believe state law authorizes. I would recommend that. So obviously today we don't want to get into that. How to draw that line between achieving goals and the evaluation criteria, I'm not quite sure, but we can certainly pay closer attention to it when we get closer and set up the actual meeting. Renee and I can meet and sort out what specifically is best for an open discussion and what is best for a closed discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I think in relation to Commissioner Dean's comment, I think it's nice. I think we might want to think holistically about what an evaluation looks like, and sort of thinking through confidentiality and anonymity. I know that can be a fairly robust process, and given that this is a 6-month evaluation, I wonder if it's the right time to do that, or if there is I understand it seems like it's just kind of wanting to get a sense of how a relationship, how is a city manager building relationships, which maybe can be teased out by Renee a little bit, doing sort of like a full kind of 360 evaluation of relationships and with a variety of stakeholders may be better done later, at a 1 or 2 year period. That would just be my kind of feedback. But perhaps there's a, sort of a middle ground maybe that Renee can work through.
Thank you, commissioners.
Mr. Mayor,
Any other? Yes, please go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
I'm quite supportive of the tools that Director McMahon has given us. I also am I think it's really important that at some point during the first year that we get a sense of how the employee manager relationship is going. And I think I guess from my perspective at this point, as Commissioner O'Loughlin mentioned, it might be a little challenging to get that kind of tool injected into this process right now. But I think just having a discussion with the manager of her sense on it at this point, how she feels about it, her self-assessment, so to speak, I'm comfortable, but at least having the discussion on the employee manager relationship is important. So, Mr. Mayor, if I might just ask a question of the director, perhaps the city manager, the timeline for us, what are we looking at of making this
Director
evaluation
McMahon?
happen?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Commissioner Logan, the timeline really will be driven by the commission and the time that it needs for you and the city manager to provide this information and collect the information to share back with the city manager. As you saw in my very first shotgun approach to this, probably 6 weeks ago, I think I gave you, 2 weeks to return the information, but maybe that was a little too aggressive, not really appreciating the full process. So if you agree, and this, minus maybe a better vetted, discussed way to get some more feedback about the relationships, and without a 360, I agree, Commissioner O'Loughlin and Commissioner Logan, Commissioner Dean too, that we do not have enough time to really fully develop and vet a 360 or even a real structured way of getting that feedback, but we can get a sense of it in some way, and we can put that together relatively quickly and get that in front of you in terms of a process. And I'll be working with city manager and perhaps Mr. Mayor in developing something to get to sooner rather than later. But all that to say is today's the 26th. If we're close to this criteria, we all agree. I would think that you all could get something and put it together and have city manager have something you could say just within a month. I don't know how that sounds and how that lands, but it's really up to you. But I would suggest within a month.
Mr. Mayor, a follow-up?
Please go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. Perhaps for the manager, are you comfortable with what we've been talking about here?
I am. Yeah. What I'm getting from the summary is that a larger 360-degree relationships type survey is best out in the outbound, but I obviously will, of course, be able to provide what I think, because of the priority relationship building is within the goals overall. I'll give you an evaluation, my self-evaluation of, but I do think it is important that something from the team be provided. It has only been 6 months, and I recognize that that's a short window to build relationships with a team that you're leading. So I'm open to providing my own information, but I don't know that we've actually come to an agreement on what it is that relationship looks like from the staff side. So in this short window, Renee, do you have any suggestions that might be helpful?
Right, and I think that's something that I will need to think through in exactly what does that question look like given the short period of time, and how do you define relationship? And so I'd like to think that through a little bit more. I also think when we talk about a 360, that evaluation, that's a complicated and it seems oversimplified term. So we really need to synthesize and decide exactly what that is and what works best for our construct, and what information are we really trying to glean from our employee base. Is it really a 360 evaluation? Is that really what we're trying to get at? Is it more of a climate, how do our employees feel about being employee of the city, and where are the things we need to address, and what's going well and not going well? Maybe that includes leadership in some way, but that is a much more fulsome, deeper conversation that we'll want to actually develop. What questions do we really want to have answered, and what intersections is leadership included in that assessment? So that's like you said, City Manager, that is down the road and something that's definitely on the radar of the HR staff. But I do think somehow defining for whoever it is that we decide to get feedback from, it may be just the leadership team at this juncture, and defining, what do we mean by define, or how would you characterize the relationship with the city manager in your role? And we'll come up with something and present it to you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Director McMahon.
And Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner?
I just want to say, I think that a month is reasonable too. So I think, I would urge Mr. Command just to push us if you need quicker turnaround, because obviously we have had a lot on our plates, but this is of the utmost importance too. So appreciate all your work in getting us there.
Thank you. Any other comments on this? Do we have any public comments? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I have no raised hands and I have no written public comment.
Thank you. City Attorney update.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm just Manager and I are looking for some guidance on how to proceed with the county in relation to the City County Health Board and recently passed legislation, House Bill 121 specifically. I'll just go over the very brief history of the City County Joint Health Board. Cities of Helena size, first-class cities, must have a health department. In 1975, the city and the county entered into an agreement to combine together to form a health department through a joint city-county health board, which continues to this day. Generally, that board adopts rules and regulations for public health, and that includes more than just pandemics. It's more the day-to-day, pools, restaurants, septic systems, that sort of thing. They also appoint the public health officer. House Bill 121 changed that authority. It makes the health board itself more of an advisory body. So the board can now only recommend to the governing body, and keep that phrase in mind because that's where the crux of the issue lies here. Can only recommend to the governing body the adoption of rules and regulations under Title 50 and the recommend appointment of the health officer. The board still retains authority to implement and enforce those regulations adopted by the governing body and to oversee the daily operations of the health department, including supervising the health officer and engaging in enforcement actions. So I mentioned the governing body. House Bill 121 defines the governing body for our purposes, where we have a joint board, as whatever the city and the county have defined that phrase in its bylaws, in the agreement, and some other memorandum of understanding. The city and county, the agreement we currently have does not define who or what the governing body is. And so you can see that the problem is now we don't have a governing body that can adopt and approve health regulations going forward. I believe, and I think the county attorney's office agrees, that all existing regulations are still good, don't need to be approved by the governing body. But if we want to make any changes, we need to sort out this governing body issue. So we've identified sort of three options. One of those options, the second one, has subcomponents to it. So the first option is appoint either the Board of County Commissioners or the City Commission as the governing body. I think that one has some potential jurisdictional issues. Option two is to create an independent body comprised of representatives from the Board of County Commissioners and the City Commission. It could be a subset of the Board of Health, or it could be independent of the Board of Health. And then finally, third, appointing the board itself as the governing body. So just basically giving them the authority they had prior to House Bill 121. And looking at all the options, staff felt that option three is the best. It would continue the existing situation, which appears to have worked since the board's creation in 1975, and would avoid some jurisdictional issues and concerns, mostly with number one, but obviously would be part of the discussion with number two. And I can answer any questions. That's a real brief rundown.
Thank you, Attorney Jordan. Do you have comments or questions from the commission?
Mayor, I have one question.
Please.
To the city attorney. Is the county attorney sort of recommending the same three options, or have they yet to have these conversations?
So Rachel and I met with Roger in the county attorney's office and Drenda. I'm not quite sure what the county's preference is at this point. I gather it might be some combination of one and two, but the manager and I are bringing this here today so that we can gather the city commission's input, so that Rachel then can now go back and we can start discussions about which option we want to proceed and what the outlines of that look like.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the county did have also, just to add, these same three options. So you're all, both sides are working from the same list of definitions. And then we had shared to Roger and the county attorney that we felt there was no reason to change it up, but that we needed to talk to the commission and make sure we understood. That is that the option three maintains, in essence, the activity as we see it, as has been in place since 1975.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioner, are you done?
Yeah, that was my only question. Thank you.
Okay. With me, in my opinion, I think option three will be, if it maintains the integrity of the board, I would stick with option three. Any other comments from the commission?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dane.
I too am comfortable going with option three. I also think that, this body has obviously had to work really hard over the last year and a half. And Drenda obviously really did an exceptional job in leading us through a once in a century crisis. And I will just say yet again, I'm disappointed that the legislature decided to, put forward legislation that really is, the antithesis of local control. But here we are. And I think that our support for option 3 would be the best course of action.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the commission?
Mayor, I'll just echo. I think option 3 makes a lot of sense and worth having those conversations with the county. I think I do actually think that our county public health board has been quite responsive to both the public and to elected officials, and I think trying to sort of preserve a board that has both expertise and is able to respond quickly to the needs of the public health officer makes a lot of sense in my mind. So I would also be supportive of pursuing option 3.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any others?
And Mayor, I may be trying to foreclose coming back to you. My understanding, and I hope I don't get this wrong, but my understanding is, I don't know where the county commission lies as a whole, but there might be a general desire that the county, at least elected officials, should be the ones overseeing the health rules for the city and the county, if we still keep a joint board. So I think that is at least some of where the leaning towards option 1 or 2, probably 2 more than 1, comes from. So I don't know if, I don't want to necessarily push for an alternative discussion, but just wanted to let you know that may be some insight from where the county might be coming from.
Thank you, Attorney Jordan. Do we have any other comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner Dane.
I guess I would just say that if the county does, for some reason, decide they prefer 1 or 2, I think maybe it's an opportunity to put it on an agenda for a city-county joint meeting, so we understand, what their thought around that is, and they maybe can get a better perspective of why we prefer option 3.
Sure. Any others? So, Manager Holshaw, do you have your direction on this topic?
I do, thank you.
Thank you. At this time, do we have any public comments on this? Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I have no raised hands and no written public comment.
Thank you. Department direction, feedback needed. 5A, presentation of draft report on the creation of the redevelopment agency. Manager Hollishock.
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, I'm really excited to share with you the results of this draft report that was developed on the redevelopment agency. It's very timely, but also not timely enough. And I know that there's interest in having this item as part of the budget, but also that there's much more conversation needed in understanding all of the details within. So I want to, of course, turn this over to Director Haugen, who will introduce our contractors and engineers and project team, who will share the conclusion. But ultimately, want to offer up that this is definitely another conversation needed type topic, and look forward to hearing and talking more at the end around a working session with you all. Thank you.
Comments or questions from the commission? Okay, we'll now move on to what we have transferred from item 3.
Presentation. Sorry, just
3B. Excuse me?
So apologies on interrupting you, Mayor. There's still a presentation pending. and Sharon's going to introduce it.
Oh. You have the floor, Director Hagen.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, we have this evening Ryan England. He's from Better Cities. He was our consultant. He has a brief presentation, and we have set aside a short time for questions. But as Manager Hollishock has indicated, we understand this is a very important topic for the city, and it may be fodder for a separate working session. But with your permission, I'll turn it over to Mr. England.
Thank you, Director Hagen. Mr. Egan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the opportunity, Mayor, Commissioners, and City Manager to make this presentation. I'm going to share my screen now so that you can watch it online. I hope you can all see that.
No.
Might take a moment. Is that now visible?
Yes, it is.
All right. Quickly, would like to go through just a number of slides as an introduction to this. Slide 3 will give you an analysis, and following slides about kind of give you some sense of what we did in analyzing this. We also want to talk through some of the options we looked at for governance and administration, which are the two basic issues that one deals with a redevelopment agency. Finally, show you our initial recommendation, some examples of staffing and budgeting that we've seen in other cities, and then some next steps, and then move to questions and answers. If you need to, we have an appendix which lists criteria for making this decision, critical success factors for such an agency, and best practices. The goal we were given was to choose the optimal RDA or URD, however you want to determine. This would be a redevelopment agency governance administration approach. We looked at 20 different cities across the state and region, and we also interviewed key stakeholders in Helena. Our recommendation is going to be so far that we have a single independent redevelopment agency governing all 3 of the urban renewal districts in the city today. That a board of 5 or 7 people be appointed by the mayor and ratified by the city commission. And that would have its own set of bylaws and terms and so forth. We also recommend that the administration of the RDA be done by an economic development professional reporting directly to the city manager. As we've looked across this, we're finding out generally that redevelopment agencies are very helpful when the private market is simply not sufficient to provide the redevelopment that's required in a certain part of the city, generally a blighted part. Helena currently has 3. The railroad was set up in 2016 with an 8-member advisory board, downtown in 2018 with a 14-member advisory board, and Capitol Hill Mall just last year with the board yet to be determined. By the way, these advisory boards could continue in place with our recommendation being advisory to the agency that we're recommending be set up. Our approach was to survey RDAs across the state and region to interview key Helena stakeholders, identify the best practices and some options, and finally make a recommendation. This is an example of the people we talked to. As you can see, we had a pretty rich group of people from Helena who spent considerable time with us. We also looked at 20 cities, 4, actually we looked at 5 in Montana, looked into Idaho, Wyoming, and then further abroad as well, looking for cities of roughly similar size that gave us a lot of information about how their RDAs worked, which is one reason why the lower half of that were selected. So we got good information from them. We also sent an online survey to 16 elected city officials in Montana and 74 outside, and got a reasonably good response from them. This is an example of one of the questions that was asked. We wanted them to rank the outcomes expected of redevelopment, and then you move the choices higher or lower on this list. As you can see, the top one was to revitalize a district, followed closely by removing blight. Expanding housing options was also important, not for everyone, but for a number of our interviewees, that was an issue. Little less important was the developing local economy. And we had 2 others, create a sense of place and adding jobs, which had relatively little importance applied to it. The entire survey is available in a separate report, but this gives you an example of the kinds of things we were learning from people. We've come up with there two basic characteristics for an RDA. One is looking at governance, the second administration. Administration is either done by staff who are city employees or by a staff reporting directly to the boards and funded generally out of TIF funds. In governance, we can have a city council by you folks that would handle all of the RDs directly. You might have one advisory board for all of them, an advisory board for each one as you have today, an independent board for all URDs, or an independent board for each one. And as you can see, the list of names, Bozeman, for example, likes kind of across the board, a little bit of everything. Butte looks for one board for all of the IRDs, but also they kind of split between one of them having city employees and one of them having staff directly reporting to the board. As we looked across the cities, though, the plurality was to have one independent board for all our URDs and having the staff reporting to that board being city employees. So you get a good connection with the city as well as the board itself. Bottom line is that a considerable majority of our interviewees supported having an independent redevelopment board of either 7 or 5 members, supported by an economic development expert being a member of the city staff. As you saw earlier, we had a number of people in the private sector that we interviewed. And this one comment, I think, characterized what we heard from many. He said, what I would emphasize is getting people on the board who are not from the public sector alone. It's good to have them, but the private sector has a different point of view, and we need a good balance of dreamers and real world people who will say, and this is critical, we have $1 million to spend. How do we spend it to generate $2 million? And that came across in several places, that the purpose of this is not just to remove blight or bring things back to control, but to make sure that whatever money is being spent adds money in the future, generates more than that. Here's some examples of staffing and budgeting. And by the way, very few of them report these out directly. So once we get some direction from you, we'll be able to talk to people and get more information from them. But Butte, for example, with the URD that is direct, they have an accountant, a community development director part-time, a historic preservation officer part-time, and a full-time secretary for salaries about $166,000 with about 2 3/4 FTEs or full-time equivalents. As you look at the payroll expenses, those are separated out for Bozeman, Missoula, and Butte. You can see there's a wide variety, taking the full cost of employees. Butte spends about $232,000, Bozeman about $250,000, and Missoula for one of the URDs is about $660,000. You can take those numbers over to the orange box and looking at Missoula compared to Butte, where they do break this out for 2 fiscal years. The personnel costs of Missoula are around $600,000 to $660,000, and the URD in Butte is about $220,000 to $230,000. They both have supplies, of course. It's interesting to us that Missoula also had a lot of purchase outside services, mostly consultants. Butte had very little. So the range we saw was somewhere around $250,000 up to $1 million. And our recommendation, of course, would be closer to the $250,000. One of the Georgia County managers we've spoken of had the rather terse comment that the only job the ED director created was his own. So the idea is to make sure that whoever is running this and whoever is on the board, that they're making sure that we're getting results from this and not just spending money to keep one's jobs. Next step is to decide the type of governance, whether that's any one of the options I showed in the earlier slide, and administration, whether that's done by staff reporting to the board or staff reporting to the city council, or city commission rather, through the city manager. The next question is decide whether to form the agency or not. If that's decided to do so, then we need to staff that and make sure we set it up legally, compose the board of 5 or 7, draft a vision, mission, and goals, and then finally create a budget and an action plan to move forward. Sharon, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. England.
Thank you, Mayor.
Director Hagen, you have the floor.
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I really don't have anything else. We did have a copy of the draft report was attached to the agenda. We can make it available to the public, but now be the time to have any questions from the City Commission, and also maybe to have a quick discussion on whether or not we want to do a separate work session for this topic.
Thank you, Director Hagen. Comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
Just a couple. First, I just want to thank everyone for their work on this document and the presentation. I think this is going to be, it's really exciting, and I think it's going to be pivotal as we, execute a cohesive and holistic vision for Helena, and just very excited to see this come to fruition. Couple questions I had was, one, I saw that in some of the comments with the stakeholders, this came up, and I have a feeling it will probably be included in some of the citizen input section when we get that. It wasn't included in this report, but I'm wondering if we could get some recommendations or thoughts about how we address some of the concerns about potentially losing, a specific neighborhood perspective by going to one specific board. And I heard at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that, we could keep the boards as an advisory board to this agency. But I know I'll be interested in, how do we address that concern so that we really are addressing, what the neighborhood needs, but also making sure it's consistent with the full vision for Helena. And then the other question I had was in terms of how the staffing position is funded, if it happens, is it funded equally between districts if there's one board, or is that proportional to the increment that's being brought in? And I would say, just to Ms. Director Haugen's comment, I think I would be interested in, having another opportunity to really kind of flesh out some of this to make sure that we are, hitting the ground running if we do pull the trigger on this redevelopment agency. Thanks, Mayor, and looking forward to those answers.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director Hagen.
Mr. Mayor, perhaps Mr. England would have some insight into those questions since he did the interviews, or any thoughts, if you don't mind, Ryan.
Thank you. Every single person we talked to wanted to make sure that we maintained strong representation from each of the neighborhoods we're talking about, even though they're fairly close together. Looking at a map of Helena, my map's about that big, by the way, so it looks really close. They want to make sure that we're doing it. We have representation from public and private citizens, and that we're doing a job properly. One way to do that would be to allow the current advisory boards to continue, or reconfigure them so you have some representation. That's actually quite common across cities, to have the board itself have an advisory board given to them. So that'd be one thing we can talk about, and I really appreciate you asking about that, because people are very concerned to make sure that happens. I think the key issue is the composition of the board itself. And by the way, 5 members or 9 are pretty good numbers. 9 is 5 or 7 rather. 9 is too many. The reason I put one of the small cities of about 2,000 population, one of them has a board of 30 people, and I'm not sure who's not on the board, but it's kind of hard to make a decision. So 5 or 7 would be the best, and you really need to be careful to appoint exactly the right people to do that, and that is your decision as commissioners and mayor to do so. Regarding the allocation, that is a negotiated issue. Almost all of the people we looked at had one of the URDs, for example, in Bozeman, would handle everybody else's finances and their work, and then each one would have a charge back to the city, or pay back to the city for the time used. So in some cases, it's based on actual time used. Other cases, it's a negotiated piece. And a third thing, I think, Commissioner Dean, like you mentioned, would be based on the TIF funds being spent. although I would say that more likely it's based on the amount of work required as opposed to how much is spent.
That's
Thank you.
helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. England. Any other comments from the commission?
I have a couple questions,
Please.
but I would wholeheartedly support a work session on this conversation. I think this meeting was meant to be a budget session, and so I have a lot of questions. So hopefully we can have you back as part of that work session where we can really dig into this a little bit. But one just kind of initial question, and it ties back to this question about funding. As some of these redevelopment agencies were first created, was there, say, a general fund investment by the municipality in order to get it up and running, or were urban renewal districts already established and there was an increment to draw on?
Mr. England?
Commissioner O'Loughlin, several of these have been around for a very long period of time. And our thought was, watching them as well as talking to several of them, that at least for the first couple of years to have the city department administer the RDAs is probably a very good idea. You can decide later on if you want to have it be a separate group. But having it be the city, but several of them did say, we kind of like having the city have that control over administration so we don't lose. So it doesn't become just an independent body that's completely separate from everybody. Did that help?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I mean, I think that as we're sort of thinking about this, understanding sort of the actual creation in other municipalities is going to be helpful. The other question that I have for you, Mr. England, and this is really from your perspective, working across states with redevelopment agencies in other municipalities. I'm thinking a little bit about the composition of the board. And while I definitely appreciate wanting to ensure we have diverse voices and perspectives from different areas of the city, thinking about the types of projects that are going to come forward and really thinking big, right? That 1 million to 2 million, real big picture, long-term investments and development that we could be seeing. From your perspective, who is best on this board, right? Like, is it individual citizens, or is there merit to really thinking about who has the expertise that can really think about what projects pencil out, what's going to sort of help develop economically over time? I'm just kind of I'd like your perspective and your experiences across other municipalities.
As we've talked to folks, I think the first thing they all said is, if you're kind of starting out, you have a real big opportunity to not mess it up. So I guess the issues are, you want people, a good balance between public and private. That needs to happen. The second thing, almost everybody said also, is they need to be knowledgeable. If they aren't now, they need to become so, because these are very important decisions being made. And it takes someone who knows what they're doing to make it work properly. So expertise, knowledge, and good training as well. I would say a third one would be that there's a diversity of people, not just public and private, but that there's a rich mix of folks from different perspectives who are not afraid to challenge each other and who have the wherewithal knowledgeably to do so. And I would say finally, the next one is passion. They want to be at the meetings. They're just not there to show up and say yes or no. It's not a sounding board. They're there to really work hard. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in your experience, because I know you've worked with City of Helena now a couple of times, and my understanding is you've worked in other municipalities. Is there a redevelopment agency that you can point to, say, they're really forward thinking, and worth talking to and thinking about how to replicate?
I would probably make my first call to Butte. and get a sense from them. Missoula looks on paper the best of all, but I hear a lot of really difficult things coming kind of around the corner about that situation. Bozeman has tons of money, so they can do all kinds of things they want to and shift it around. We will certainly get some, come up with perhaps a few models that you can all talk to and get a sense from them of what works, what doesn't work, what to watch out for, and what to make sure you do. I'd make my first call to Butte.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I may, this is an opportunity. I just wanted to ask one more question around redevelopment agencies across the country have different reasons for establishment. And Montana has a different reason why, and Helena may have a different reason why it needs to have a redevelopment agency. And sometimes that's been for tax sheltering. So can you also, when you look for other locations, identify it as models, or maybe help us understand the purpose more of why they were chosen to be created? I think that has a fundamental importance to the conversation.
We certainly will. In fact, the biggest example of something that fails is California. A number of years ago, they decided that they disband all RDAs completely, passed the law, and now they're getting back into it, calling them something else. But whether it's for redevelopment or improving the looks of a place, we'll get you that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
Director Haugen alluded to this, but ultimately, where will we or the public go to find out about this?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, now that we presented the draft report to the commission, we'll have the draft report, and as we move forward with iterations, we'll put that on our website under current projects. And,
Thank you.
And we'll work with the PIO too, so.
Any other comments from the commission? So, Madam Hollishaw, yeah, I think we will agree to have a special session to discuss the details and the weeds of this, the redevelopment agency presentation and where we move forward.
Excellent. Thank you. And Better Cities, it's great to see you all. And thank you so much, Sharon and Better Cities team. It's terrific work so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any other presentation, Madam Manager Hollishaw?
Not under this item, no, sir.
Okay. Now the next item here is budget draft 2 of the preliminary fiscal year budget 2020.
Thank you.
Director Hollishaw?
Thank you, Mayor.
I mean, Manager Hollishaw. Hey.
This is an admin meeting, right? So it's okay. I think
Long day.
In the admin meetings, the opportunity to be less formal is nice, so we can have a more robust conversation around the submittals and information. So tonight we provided to you via email, and we're really doing our best to pull together a budget that we believe represents the kind of the industry standard that has not been in place here for a while. And really, I want to share that a recent conversation I had with the leadership team about this budget process, and I think it sheds light on what the experience has been like overall. And I want to also say thank you to all of them, and to Sheila Danielson for her leadership, and Renee for hers on salaries, and Chris, and I can go on and on. The team really has stepped up to understanding the difference between what budget system has been in place for a while and what this offers. And what this offers is the city manager an opportunity to provide to you what it means to be a city manager run local government that establishes some base level expectations with their directors, and then funds the priorities based on your set key outcomes. So what you are being provided are what we believe to be the needed pieces to move the city forward. In greatest policy conversation that really has struck out of all the conversations so far has been the difference between the distinction of a legally balanced budget and a structurally balanced budget. And the first presentation that we provided around the budget was of the primary establishment and setting out what that kind of budget and the level of detail that we were trying to ensure you received as requested. And so that was offered up by Sheila that first night. And then the second round was this further conversation about the difference between a structurally balanced budget, and I offered up ideas on how to get to a structurally balanced budget. Now, that is the reason, and I just want to underscore the reason why I have done it in this way is that I believe that there are two really important points for you to hear from me tonight, which is one, that as the city manager, I'm required to make sure and offer to you a budget that I believe will move Helena forward as your city manager. And the other obligation I have is to be thoughtful about what that looks like beyond just balancing the dollars. Like I said, I've complete in my message to you all that I completed a fiscal stability analysis of the city, and the city is unstable. The city is unstable because its base structures around assessments and a variety of operations are not and have not been in place, and they need to be put into place. And you've all have been very engaged in those conversations, and I appreciate that. The reason, and as I went back over the last several days and in listening to the teams, the reason I'm still arriving at a place in support of having the city meet the actual state definition of a balanced budget is that the city is not structurally balanced. It's not fiscally stable. We need to invest in activities that will get us there, and we cannot do that if we cut the operational requests that our team is making to you. So that has been the case in the past, where we've gone in and crossed out items. The commission has striked out items, and then the city manager would submit the budget, and then the motion would move forward and edits would be made and so forth. That's not the traditional method of a city manager run organization. And I want to make sure and make that distinction clear. This isn't an effort to set out a distinction between how I run the organization and the community's input. I want to make sure that you hear me. I really appreciate the level of effort the HCC went through, the Helena Citizens Council. They thoughtfully culled through what we had given to them and what we've given to you as the city manager. I really believe in their role in providing input and providing thoughtful conversation to our team. That said, I also would really love to see the city be structurally balanced, but that is not the organization that I've walked into as your city manager. I've been here 6 months, just hit 7 months, and it's just not realistic to assume that that can be done. So I wanted to underscore the importance of tonight's conversation is really between the first introduction as done by our director Danielson, and then over time, the conversations that we've had. The greatest underscoring is the policy conversation that I'm bringing to you, really, which is, one, are we running a legally balanced budget, or are you cutting our staffing requests and what we need in order to be fiscally stable into the future as a result of wanting to be structurally balanced in an appearance, first? And then second, what is the expectation of the city manager if, in fact, I cannot offer up to you all my recommendation? And that's really what this is, my recommendation. I have offered all the working sessions to ensure that I respond to the needs and asks of you by way of clarifications and further detail. And I recognize there are items that are of greater importance than others. However, I would be remiss if I did not listen to my team and did not bring forward their requests in the way that I felt was most appropriate. So the distinctions between the initial ask and this one are the golf course debt. And you'll see that technically we cannot move the, in paper form, the dollars out of the general fund and into the golf fund because, or out of the golf fund and into the general fund where the burden was actually dedicated, because we don't actually have the account that establishes that. But we will be doing that if approved, to move those dollars back to the general fund as a debt. Then also coming back, there were revisions to the Civic Center revenues, and I can go further into those, and I can also ask our finance director, Danielson, to provide more line item to you all for greater detail. But the bigger policy questions, again, are coming back to this. Are we structurally balanced, or are we balanced to the definition of the city, and ensuring the integrity of the city manager role in submitting their budget? Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Holshock. Comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
I guess before we get going too far, I guess I'm interested. I asked this question of the commission of us because I think there's been a little bit of a back and forth over the course of the last few weeks about her approach. And I guess I'm curious as to whether the commission is supportive of what the manager has presented to us relative to sort of the, if I'm understanding this correctly, the legally balanced budget this year, which gets us to a structurally balanced budget in future years. And I guess, you know, as part of the commission, I will answer my own question that I am comfortable with that. I guess to me, that seems to be a pretty fundamental question before we get going too far.
Thank you, Commissioner Logan. Comments or questions concerning what Commissioner Logan just proposed?
Yeah, Mayor, I have some thoughts actually on the city manager's presentation first.
Go ahead.
So first, I want to just take a step back and, you know, the city manager put forward a schedule for us that is different than what we've had in the past. I made it very clear at the beginning of these discussions that traditionally we've had a preliminary budget in front of us. We have enacted that preliminary budget and then had budget discussions after that. The city manager chose to move forward with this process of having these conversations in advance of passing the preliminary budget. So I just want to say, city manager, that was your choice, right? So I am not very sympathetic to this comment around the city manager's role, because I raised concerns about this process and changing this process when we started these discussions earlier this year. I will also say this budget looks vastly different than any budget we've ever seen. And I think that there's some confusion around sort of what appears to be a choice that's being put forward to us. Do we want to move forward with what is consider a balanced budget under state law, or do we want to consider structural balance? I would say most governing bodies, as they're thinking about a budget, should be thinking about both of those things. And I would hope that Director Danielson would agree with me on that. You can't just have structural balance. You also need to have legal balance. You need both. You need to ensure that you have cash on hand to cover ongoing expenses. But in the long term, we need to also make sure that our revenue, our ongoing revenue, meet ongoing expenditures. Structural balance isn't necessarily a point in time consideration. It is, do we have structural balance in the future? So now I want to get to Commissioner Logan's question. Commissioner Logan, your question assumes that we have structural balance in the future. That has not been shown to us. And I find it hard to understand how injecting $1.6 million in additional new ongoing expenditures that we're going to reach structural balance in the future if we don't have structural balance today, right? There was some conversation about growth in revenue. There are only two ways you can get to structural balance. One is growing your revenue or cutting your expenditures. And I'm not seeing either of those things in 2023 or 2024 that suggests that we're going to be in a different circumstance than we are today structurally. If it'd be one thing if we were saying we're going to put in place, how many ever new FTE for 2 years, right? And then we're going to eliminate those expenditures in the future. Or we're going to look at, assessments in a different way, or we see revenue growth coming in that far exceeds the growth that we've experienced in the last couple of years. I have not seen that information. So I think that I appreciate your question of, do we support the city manager's strategy? But I take issue with the assumption that we are going to experience structural balance next year. So I would just say it's important to think about both of these things. I not once have I suggested that we are not meeting a balanced budget in accordance with, with the law. We often don't have structural balance during the preliminary budget. We didn't last year, right? But we had conversations about adding new FTE and that being an ongoing expenditure and how we're going to pay for that over time. I think that's a fair question to ask. This is a significant growth in city government with these new FTE. We have often made the cost of living adjustment contingent upon where revenue will come in at the end of the fiscal year. So I don't think these questions are extraordinary questions. I think these are typical questions that we pose during the preliminary budget discussion. Now, my preference, since we're having these conversations before the preliminary budget, is to make some adjustments now so that we're fiscally sound moving into the next fiscal year. That would be my preference. I'm not suggesting that we have to be precise. I understand and recognize Director Danielson's comment last meeting that we do see revenue come in above what we've projected in previous fiscal years. That gives us some buffer, but we're standing at a pretty significant imbalance between revenue and expenditures that I think warrants a full discussion by this commission. It is our responsibility to pass this budget. Yes, it is the responsibility of the city manager to put forward a preliminary budget, but it is the responsibility of the commission to pass the budget.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Loughlin. Any other comments from the commission?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
So first, I have two questions on that, or I guess I have a comment and a question. So first, to answer Commissioner Logan's question, and I appreciate the memo from the manager, really lining out what policy questions she needs answered. And I think that I am in favor of making sure that we are, first aligning to what state law says and putting ourselves on a path to being structurally balanced and sustainable in the years to come. And I think it's obviously important that we are, making good steps to get there. I think that, for example, the staff member that is contemplated in the redevelopment agency that would be included here is, really important, because we want to continue to have redevelopment opportunities within Helena and bring in new business and keep people here in good paying jobs. But I'm wondering if maybe the city manager could respond to some of the comments, because everything that I've read here, it makes sense to me why we need to make sure that we are making investments right now so that we can have long-term stability. And I'm just wondering if the manager might be able to respond to some of Commissioner O'Loughlin's concerns.
Yes.
But excuse me, before Manager Holshaw, before you go through that, I'm sorry, Commissioner Dean, may I just make a comment? Because I thought Manager Holshaw did provide a stability analysis. And if she did, and shared those issues with all of us. So if that stability analysis was shared with us, I think we're running in circles right now.
What I'm hearing is that, Mr. Mayor, I think you're probably right. What I am hearing, and from all of the analysis that we've been provided, we need to meet first the legal definition of having a balanced budget, and in order to reach structural a structurally sound budget, we have to be making investments to get to that point. But first we have to meet that legal definition and get all of these other policies in place so that we are having the policy in place to get to that balance. So that's what I'm hearing, but it sounds like Commissioner O'Loughlin is finding a different analysis, and I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of how we move forward.
Manager Holshaw.
Yeah, thank you. No, you're absolutely right, Commissioner O'Loughlin. This budget, you've never seen one like this before. The city hasn't had a city manager in place that's a strong city manager in its role in a very long time. The structure of this document is actually one that has been in place by local governments for a long time. And I shared with the team what has been the greatest struggle for them is having to respond to my asks for documents and information for this budget, because in local government finance conversations, that's the point of these documents, is that they're a conversation with the community about where we're going. You can go to Great Falls and look at Great Falls fiscal year 21 budget. You can go to Bozeman's and see the same kinds of detail. We are just beginning to bring Helena up to the expectations that go towards other local governments across the US. Now, I gather and understand that the City Commission has been running the budget for a long time, and the way it has been, and it was really an interesting conversation for me to have a direct one with our leadership team today to say, it is my obligation to provide to the commission a budget that I believe meets the needs and outcomes that they are after. Now, I don't believe creating it as a result of the need of cutting items that cannot be supported because the city lacks expense the actual expenditure related policies that would result in an improved method of assessment, method of rate setting. Remember, I pulled the book of fees because none of that is in place. Also, the actual charging of funds to the accounts that they should be from the general fund, the enterprise fund. That is the second layer that I shared. And then last, the inability of our team to maintain stability because we're not paying a competitive dollar for a salary to a municipal employee. And I understand and hear that that does not and has not had a value. It is a value of mine as your manager. That's my obligation, is to fairly compensate the employees. I have shared to you in previous conversations that one of the first reviews I did of our salaries was to whether or not there are significant impacts within the classifications. And those are being offered up. There are gaps, and there's even more work to be done to write what needs to be done. Our new human resources director will have a great deal of time that they're going to have to spend in making sure that these classifications for our employees are correct, that we don't have vastly different positions being paid out of the same classification. Now, as it relates to debt and investments, and these are all policy conversations that have not happened. Instead, we get to the budget. The commission decides what the budget will look like, and then we move forward. I'm suggesting, and I get that you have not done this way, and I deliberately, you're right, Commissioner O'Loughlin, I had a choice to walk you through the difference between this, what a city manager displayed budget would look like versus what, and in that conversation, the real crux of it being this policy around structural balance and the definition of legal balance here. We cannot balance and move forward as a city, and I don't believe you hired me as the city manager to hold back on telling you what we need as an organization in order to hit fiscal stability. I do believe that we have a difference of opinion on what fiscal stability means and the role of the city manager in sharing to you how best to get there.
Thank you, Madam Halshock. In light of that, I am also with the agreement that we should move with the state's definition of what a sound budget should be, the definition of the state's balanced budget. So do we have any other comments from other commissioners?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner
The question
Halliday.
for the question for the five of us, and anyone can answer if they want to. Did we adopt a legally balanced budget last year?
Well, the situation last year was not the same as this year.
We adopted a legally balanced budget last year. Does anybody know if we adopted a legally balanced budget the year before that? We adopted a legally balanced budget the year before that. Does anybody know if we adopted a legal budget the year before that, the year before that?
Yes.
Yeah, we did. And the reason I'm saying that is the city of Helena, as far back as I know, whether it was under Manager Alice or Manager Cortez, Manager Taylor, Manager Burton, always adopted legally balanced budgets. That's nothing new. If we weren't adopting a legally balanced budget, our manager, our finance director, and Mr. Joden would have to be running in the room and explaining to us with charts and monosyllabic words that we're not adopting a legally balanced budget. So we've always adopted a legally balanced budget. So I think that one is like off the table. Of course, we're adopting a legally balanced budget. We always have and we will. And if we weren't, we'd have to be having conversations seriously about cutting or expenditures or what we're going to be doing. So we're adopting a legally balanced budget, period. When I hear Commissioner O'Loughlin say, I haven't seen a process like this, which is true, it's a different process. But really what this budget looks like has to do with the projected deficit when I look at it. Again, I've only been here for a snapshot of time. I've seen what, eight preliminary budgets now. We've never had one with a projected deficit of 1.6 million. That's just true. That's a fact. Now, does that mean that this budget's upside down and a mess? Not per se, but Commissioner Laughlin is correct. We've never had a budget projecting this significant of new year over year in the whole outlays at the front end of the budget. That is a fact. What we want to do about it, how you want to feel about it, that's your own subjective opinion, but that is something we've never seen. We've always had a manager-driven budget. Again, every year since I started, and Commissioner Logan, you were part of them. You came in when you were police chief. The budget was presented to the commission on preliminary budget night, right? And we walked through it. During the process, individual commissioners might have raised questions about different things. And at the end of the day, a budget was passed. It was a manager-driven budget that the commission worked through, had sessions, staff brought their numbers in. But there's fundamentally not a lot different when you look at this book versus the one from 5 years ago or 8 years ago. So there's really not a huge distinction. So let's just stop beating around the bush on all of those discussions here. The question of structural balance, of course, we all want structural balance, right? I was reading your op-ed in the paper from a few years ago, Commissioner Logan, the other day, where you decried the potential for 4% staff salary increases. This year, we're projecting for the general fund, right, a 4.92%. I don't think that's an unfair discussion for the five of us to have. That's not a commentary on the manager's plan for the future. That's a discussion that a commission has in approving a budget. The questions that I've heard Commissioner O'Loughlin raise here and over the last couple of meetings are simply questions that one would expect a discerning board, any board, whether it's a public body, whether it's the board of a not-for-profit, asking questions about the shape of the body's future, asking to look at specifically, are all of the facets of what is being proposed necessary? Do they all jive? Those are just normal things that we do as the five of us. So it's not a discussion of, do you support this budget or do you not support this budget? We're not doing oath and loyalty shibboleth tests here. We're vested with the job of reviewing this budget. And that's the discussion that we haven't necessarily had very cleanly, because every time it's brought up, it's turned into this sort of, are you against the manager's budget? Are you for the manager's budget? Do you believe in legal structure versus, long-term systemic structure? That's not what we're doing here. We're trying to do a budget. I've voiced a lot of concerns throughout this process. I'm not hearing a lot of concerns out of others, but I'll keep voicing them, because I think we need to have that discussion. And I hope others will be open to those discussions rather than trying to sort of shut it down with this idea that somehow that's unsupportive. We've been here before. I've been sitting here for 8 years. We've been here before. This isn't our first rodeo. We've budgeted a deficit every single year that I've been here. This is the largest, and it's fair to have a discussion about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments from the commission?
Yeah, I do actually just have a question, since I spent most of my time answering that other discussion. For the manager, I'm going to distinguish between two different types here. We've got enterprise funds and we have general funds. When you talk about assessments and rate setting, which are you referring to? The general fund rates and assessments or enterprise fund rates and assessments? Because I see those as different things.
So the general fund is the burden of the staff that you see, that you've been greatly concerned with. So there's the one-time costs, which we would be charging. Of course, we would be hitting one-time money with these new staff, and then also with a COLA, cost of living assessment adjustment. So as it relates to those positions, As we shared last time with Director Danielson, we need to appropriately allocate charges in the general fund that are being hit by the general fund that belong in the enterprise funds. So number one, we cannot assess the correct assessments within the enterprise funds without allocating these expenses that should be in the general fund, out of the general fund and in them. So that is not realistic within the current time frame of and how long I've been here, 6 months. So that's not.
So I agree with
you. So to your question, I'm not done. Sorry. Thank you. As to the increase in the general fund does not have the opportunity for the greater increase over time, as you're pointing to. Now, what is the opportunity still left? Those are things that I will share an opportunity over to Finance Director Danielson to help respond to. How do we address this longer term issue that we really haven't addressed as a city? That's whether or not you support my budget as I bring it in. Isn't the point is not about the money. The point is about the real lack of financial focus on policy and staffing to maintain the budget. That's to just focus on money would be removing the actual conversation that results in it being hit. And so I'm going to turn it to Commissioner. I'm going to turn it over to Director Danielson quickly if she has anything to add by way of dollars.
Thank you, Manager Holoshock and Mayor and Commission. On that lines, as far as the, I understand the Commission's concern about wanting to make sure that in the long term that these proposed changes are going to be sustainable. What I have been trying to communicate that to the Commission is that along with Manager Holoshock, I've only been here 6 months, and I have not had the opportunity to truly evaluate how some of the assessments are happening from the general fund out to the enterprise funds and special revenue funds. So that's one. I have looked at it and I have many questions on how it's being allocated. It's not that it shouldn't be recovered. The general fund administrative costs should be recovered, and its proportionate share to enterprise activities and special revenue activities. What my concern is that I don't understand, nor do I necessarily agree with how those costs have been allocated in the past. That is why I set the rates for cost allocation from the general fund back to fiscal 2020 so that I could so that I could have the opportunity to review how those allocations are happening out to the other funds. In addition to that, not only does it increase revenue for the general fund as a cost recovery, it pushes that as a cost out to the other funds. That pushing out of the costs to the other funds is what I have primary questions about, and I need time to analyze. So that's part of it. That's part of the cost recovery and the sustainability to maintain some of these changes in the future. The other piece that we've communicated is that we have not proposed any new rate or assessment increases for fiscal 2022 because we want to have the opportunity to present a consistent methodology that's thoughtful and transparent, rather than just saying we're just going to increase it 3% this year because we want to add this particular cost. So therefore, none of those rate increases that have been imposed historically are in this budget. That would help close that gap with these long ongoing costs if we were to increase those rate assessments. There are also other internal charges that are being allocated out to the other funds, such as shop and fuel charges. And there's other internal costs like copier costs and telephone costs and IT&S costs, and all of these costs that are being allocated to the other funds that I have just real questions about really wanting to wrap my head around it and understanding and making sure that we're being transparent and fair in how we're allocating those costs out to the other funds and being able to recoup our general fund costs. That is the piece that is the resiliency work that I need to work with my team on, and as well as the other directors of their departments, to really present that fiscal stability, that structural balance, that sustainability in the future. And so I myself would not be comfortable in helping the city manager present a deficit spending budget without the knowledge of knowing that we have a lot of work to do in the next year to present a more fiscally sound and fiscally stable presentation to the commission next year, in addition to having a lot of legwork done on those financial policies that we're beginning to work with. Number one are the budget policies and the reserve policies that we've proposed in this current iteration of the preliminary budget. So we've asked for the commission's patience, and I'm asking for your trust and faith. The city hired me. I have over almost 30 years of budgeting experience, and I am comfortable with assisting the city manager in presenting the budget as proposed. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Director Danielson.
Mayor, I have
So
just,
I really appreciate the long explanation, but it still doesn't just go back to sort of my basic question here. When you guys are talking about rates and assessments, I'm now gathering that what we're talking about is cost recovery by the general fund from assessment. So we're starting from the baseline. I get it that it appears the commission, we're going to start from the sort of $1.6 million in the hole, and that we're not discussing reductions in any of the new estimates at this point. So assuming then that the only way to make up that gap, right, is either new money comes in, which we know it does every year because we're always conservative with our budgeting, and increases in some sort of rate. And since we know that the rates we can increase are minimal in the general fund, we're talking about cost recovery. That's what I'm getting from you all. Is then, Ms. Danielson, when you're talking about that cost recovery, is our number today, at least from your eyeball of it, understanding you've had only 6 months and are just digging into it, is our cost recovery low in the general fund, or is it too high? So do you foresee the general fund asking for more money from the transportation department for the manager or commission's time, or actually sending more money, asking for less money in recoupment?
Thank you, Commissioner Halliday. I am telling you that our cost recovery proposed in this budget is too low.
So then, if the cost recovery is too low, and that cost recovery in those funds, or in that instance, is going to have to come from the enterprise funds. And when I say enterprise, I'm generally talking about transportation, water, wastewater, stormwater, open space, those assessments that the commission can set each year, by the second or third week in August. So if those are too low, and assuming there's no fluff in those current funds, aren't we going to necessarily have to have rate increases? I understand none are being proposed this year, but absent cuts, if the cost recovery is too low and most of those funds are just keeping the wheels on every year, what comes in goes out with a little bit of money built in, pay debt, maybe save for a rainy day or for another project. Don't we have to necessarily increase rates in order to do the cost recovery that we're talking about?
It's possible. I'm not going to guarantee a yes or no on that. I have not had the time to evaluate those rates and how those rates are assessed and do that resiliency work. I do know that we are beginning the process of looking at a long-term rate setting process for the water and sewer funds. I know that Director Konopke is looking at a long-term process for rate setting and transportation funds. And I understand that Director Pinozo is looking at the same long-term forecasting methodologies for recovering costs for parks and recreation. So I cannot answer your question today whether or not those funds will have to increase rates in order to recover costs that are assessed from the general fund at this date. My primary concern with that cost recovery is how it's being allocated out to the other funds and whether or not that's fair.
So the other part of this is the clarifier is that 1.6 million isn't the number that's year over year. The number we're talking about is 900,000. Last time we met, Director Danielson noted over $600,000 just in estimates of what could actually be returned back from the general fund into the enterprise funds by way of these chargebacks are at just a thumbnail estimate. Additionally, we've seen a return every year of over $400,000 above our base revenue. So that easily covers the 900,000 that we've been talking about. So it's not 1.6 million in the hole. It's 900,000 year over year we're talking about. And Director Danielson has presented. Each week we come with responses to your questions. You have suggested that we are not giving you clear answers and that we're foggying them with long responses. And I'm telling you, every time we come, we bring you a response.
So I apologize if I'm wrong on the 1.6. The number we were shown last time had about 25 and change over about, what was it? Over 23 and change to about 25.1, which worked out to just about a 1.6. And that was the number that was put up for us. So if I misunderstood that when that red number of negative 1.6 million was put up on the board, I apologize. But I mean, here's the thing, in the way this is described, and I understand, again, people don't want to talk about this, and that's fine. That's your prerogative. I will not be here in a year. But the way this is being discussed, you all are going to have to decide if you're raising the water fund, the stormwater fund, the street fund, the open maintenance fund in order to pay for chargeback reallocations. Right? That's the solution that we're putting the city on in order to balance this, because there isn't another way to do it absent cutting, which none of us want to do. So that's a conversation you're going to have down the road. It's a worthy conversation to me for this commission to think about today so that it doesn't sandbag you later on. But I absolutely understand if you don't want to have that discussion today.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add one. I'm just going to keep responding on those. I pulled the book of fees. A lot of what you're describing by way of the fees that could have been brought forward and increased, this could potentially have been solved. I pulled the book of fees, all of the adoption of those increases, because I do not agree with how the methodology was put together. So I recognize that, people have to pay for those things that they're offered at a reasonable rate. We haven't proven that we're offering reasonable rates for the things that we're actually charged. Just the other day, I learned a part of our process in assessments requires our public works team to go out and complete a level of surveying that our public works team shouldn't be doing. So there's a structural problem as well with how we've been addressing the volume of work that we have got to do in order to move these priorities forward. Like they're not simple answers that can be result in just let's cut this and move this money over here and we're good to go. And these one-time recurring costs aren't necessary. Thank you. I always appreciate, again, I always appreciate the comments and the questions. It's just that you cannot expect in this this a level of time that we wouldn't be providing to you something different. Because both Sheila and I come from a place of having been in local government for a number of years, and this method is not unheard of.
Thank you, Commissioner Halliday and Manager Hollishock. Do you have any other comments or so from the commission?
Well, I have maybe just a process question, Mayor. I mean, I do have a number of questions now on the updated materials that we received. Is now the time that we're going to go? I mean, it's now 5:40. Are we having presentations from I can't remember if there were departments that were still expected to present. How are we using our time? And I hope that we can continue some of the sort of nitty gritty questions, given that we've gotten some revised numbers now this week.
Okay, thank you. Manager Hollishock, do you have any other presentations coming up?
Fire department, police department, and municipal court, all three are providing presentations tonight.
Okay. So we can, let's hear those presentations, please.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Chief Wood. Thank you very much for stepping in.
Thank you. So good evening,
Good evening.
City Manager, Mayor, Commission. I will be brief. I will do my screen share now. Oops. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Chief.
Okay. So this is just a brief, quick overview, high level of the Helena Fire Department budget. So this first page is the 260 Capital Improvement Fund, which comes from the fire safety levy that was passed a few years ago. Under equipment, we're looking at replacement of 3 thermal imagers, a new purchase of a forcible entry prop for training, confined space communications kit for communications when we're in confined spaces where normal radio communications often aren't possible. And then an EMAC preparedness budget for our new EMAC deployments that we've been going on. That do make money for the general fund, but they also do cause wear and tear on our apparatus and equipment. So we need to put some money back into the maintenance of that equipment. Vehicles and equipment, looking at a Command 3 to replace a old command vehicle, Battalion 1 vehicle replacement, and then the aerial ladder truck replacement also. In our general fund, looking at personnel, the increase of 1 FTE fire inspector in the Fire Prevention Bureau to both help with basic business type fire life safety inspections and to start addressing the WUI and working with Fire Safe Helena to hopefully at some point have a city sponsored WUI program. Noticeable cost, some increases have been with medical supplies, our pharmaceuticals, which is a reoccurring cost. Those have gone up. Much of this is inflation and other things. So AED for our command vehicle, disposable laryngoscopes is another area that did increase our M&O. Some new request is training. Our training library is many of our training manuals are several years old and outdated. They have not kept up with the current science of firefighting and industry best practices. Training mannequins for training. This will allow us to not have to use one of our firefighters when we're doing training. We can actually use a mannequin, which is safer and also allows more efficient training. And then a 5-inch or large diameter hose for one of our engines, getting it current with the other engines. Grants, we have in the 424 Regional Hazmat Team Grant Program, which provides money for equipment maintenance and replacement and regional hazmat team training. Also, I thought it was worth noting some of the general fund revenue that the department is now bringing in, which is new. The Department of Military Affairs, the Fort Harrison contract, which is a fairly new contract, which actually brings money into the general fund. Our EMAC deployments also bring money back into the general fund. The Fire Marshal Interdepartment Revenue Services, that's been an ongoing one. That's not new. And then the West Side Fire Service area also, as you know, has been in place for a long time. And that's the end of my presentation. Any questions?
Thank you for your presentation, Chief Wood. Do we have comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor, I have one.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, I'm wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about some of the demand that the new fire inspector will be able to address. I know that I've heard from a few different businesses that have had to get fire inspections and then, has had findings that they need to correct, and then they come back and look at it again. And I know that it ends up being kind of a longer process than we would necessarily want for local businesses that, need to be starting to turn a profit and an opportunity to have a safe environment. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about meeting that demand and if this new inspector position will help do that.
Yes, the new inspector position would help with that. Currently, we have a fire marshal, we have a deputy fire marshal. The deputy fire marshal has been performing the basic life safety inspections, which really should be done by an inspector. And the deputy fire marshal, because of what they've had to do, have not been able to be fully trained in the function of a deputy, which will, once that is accomplished, will help the fire marshal, will be a backup and be able to take some of that work, which will allow the fire marshal to focus more on new construction, new business. So yes, I do see that as definitely will help with shortening that time that businesses are waiting and can get on with their projects and new construction. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And then the only other question I had too, I know there's a lot of people listening on the line. I'm wondering if you could explain what WUI stands for.
Sorry, I apologize, Commissioner Dean. Yes, that's a wildland urban interface. So that deals with the homes that really around the South Hills, Mount Helena, Mount Ascension area that really kind of flow, and the forest and the city come together. And there is, we do have a quite of a large area that is impacted by that and is at risk. And currently, Fire Safe Helena has their program, which we have assisted with and will continue, but that program won't go on forever. And that is something that I believed really should be a function of the Helena Fire Department and the city, just like our general life safety fire inspections are. So that's, this will allow us to develop that program that'll be ongoing and just become part of what we do to keep Helena safe and address that wildland urban interface.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for the chief from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner Logan.
questions for the chief. The Fort Harrison contract, can you describe to us what goes on out there? And essentially what services are you providing that they're paying for?
Yes, Mayor, Commissioner Logan. Yes, that contract pays for essentially the same services that we provide the rest of the city. Fire protection, suppression, inspection, fire inspections of their facilities. EMS, we cover them for EMS responses. Also special events. As you remember in the past, we've had fires started out there from the training that they do on the firing range. So we occasionally will hire a crew to go out and be there on scene, both for EMS and potential wildland fire hazards. So yeah, the services we're providing the rest of the city, we are providing there. And that inspector position will also help in meeting that commitment as well.
Thank you. One other quick question. The West Side Fire Service area. How far into the future does that continue? That contract?
I don't know, Commissioner, how long that contract. I know as we annex in that area, more of that area, there are cost recovery is less. But I don't.
Okay,
I don't know.
that just a point of curiosity. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chief.
You bet.
Thank you.
Comments or questions for the chief from the commission? Chief, what's EMAG deployments?
Those are our deployments to California that we assist California with, which is through the state of Montana mutual aid agreement. And so we send the crew. In 2019, we sent one crew out. And this last year, we actually sent 2 deployments to California to assist with them. And all wages are reimbursed through California. And then there's also the money that we make from the apparatus that California pays for. So there's no cost to us. Upfront, we have to cover the overtime, but that's all reimbursed. So
How many fighters in a crew?
we send usually 4.
Thank you. Comments or questions from the commission for the chief?
Mayor, I guess just one quick question, and this
Go ahead, Commissioner.
might be for the finance department, but just looking at the proposed budget and the % increase in the personnel services, I mean, it's slightly skewed here because of the reduced general fund, because of we were able to utilize some of the COVID funds for personnel services. Do you know what the % increase is from what's projected in FY21 to what is being proposed in 22 for personnel services? And happy to get that later if that's easier.
Thank you, Commissioner Laughlin. I can get that information to you after this meeting.
Okay, great. And probably I'll have the same question for police as well, because I know that one is also a little hard to calculate out because of the COVID money.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can get that for you and the commission.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for the chief?
Just well, is the fire department, and the same question for the police there, but if you answer it now, is the fire department receiving the 2.2 COLA or is the fire department separate because of the CBA and union negotiations?
Mayor, Commissioner Halliday, the local 448 union contract is still being negotiated. So the members of the union, it's unknown at this time what that's going to end up with. As far as non-union members, I would assume yes, that they would, which includes myself, the 2 assistant chiefs, and our administrative coordinator.
So assuming that the outcome of the union negotiation results in some for union members, there are no assumptions or suppositions built into that personnel portion of this budget, are there?
All of them are charged 2.2% currently until we complete the negotiation. So we haven't revised since we're still in negotiations.
So the budget does include, Commissioner Halliday, 2.2. It is reflected for the full fire department and police department.
Gotcha.
Yes.
So if they get a number north of 2.2, we only have to
Then we'd have,
increase it by that number.
the
Correct.
difference.
Thank you.
Right. Any other comments or questions for the chief? Chief, we want to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Manager Hollishaw, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. We'll bring up the police department and then last, Nikki and the municipal court.
You have the floor, Chief.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. I'm going to bring up my screen share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This is, again, just like Chief Woods. It's going to be an overview, and any questions at the end I would gladly answer. Let me see if I can get it to cycle here. There we go. I'm going to go over just notable changes throughout our budget. The first one is the Capital Improvement Fund. We do have a radio replacement listed in there. That is covered through the general fund savings, the CARES money. That was reimbursed through police and fire and in some cases dispatch wages. We have our standard vehicle equipment, our vehicle replacement, and we've gone with hybrids. 2 years ago, we tested a hybrid, and the gas mileage on that is significantly better than the other cars. This year in FY21, we went with 2 hybrids, and next year we're going to go with all 4 being hybrids. It's about a 30% increase in fuel mileage. So that's a significant difference, and we will continue to test vehicles moving forward. And that's a 5-year replacement cycle. And then we have an administrative vehicle, and that's on a 10-year replacement cycle. So in police protection, there are no increases in FTEs. And as with the fire department, the Helena Police Protective Association contract is still being negotiated. We are very close to finishing that, but we're still in negotiations. A couple of the notable costs in our M&O increase is impound yard doing a milling overlay. Right now it's mud, and anytime it rains like it has for the last week, it becomes very difficult to move vehicles in and out of there. We also have a pretty significant problem with noxious weeds in there in the summer, and they grow up quite a bit, and they're hard to get to because of the number of vehicles we have. And those are one-time costs for that. And then we're looking at doing a workload analysis staffing study for the police department to find out based on what the community's needs are and what the police department should be responding to. And that would be a one-time cost as well. Some of the one-time costs with reoccurring costs, a Cellbrite digital device analyzer, that's for downloading phones and computers. We use it quite a bit in our sexual assault investigations and internet crimes against children. That would have a reoccurring cost for software license going beyond this year. Background investigations. So this year we started, if we are hiring someone from out of state, we fly one of our background investigators to that state to do a thorough background investigation. We get better results if we actually talk to people in person rather than on the phone. So We had a pretty significant cost this year for background investigations. And so which we hadn't budgeted for, but we are budgeting for moving forward. And then we have a Dragon Speak voice recognition software. This is for report writing. It's basically a dictation software. What the hope is to have officers use this program and dictate their reports so they spend less time actually in the office. And that would have a reoccurring software cost as well. Also under the police operations is the animal control officer. We are asking to add 0.51 FTE, and I will cover that a little bit more when I talk about urban wildlife, why that's only half of a personnel. General fund, urban wildlife. So the urban wildlife fund isn't actually under the police department. The police department manages it, but it's under the general fund. We're asking for a half a FTE for that. In response to the community's request for us to renew the deer program, which we haven't done for 2 years, we're asking for half an FTE. And in the other half of the year, when he's not doing urban wildlife, we'll be doing animal control duties. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we had 2 animal control officers. One of those positions was cut. The number of animal control calls has not gone down. It's actually stayed constant or slightly gone up. So we would like to use half an FTE to restart the urban wildlife program, and also that other half of that FTE to do animal control. And one of the things with that animal control officer we're looking at is using it to support the Parks Department on the open lands. Sorry, I went one too many. We also manage the 911 program. We did receive 2 grants this year. One of them is for a radio replacement and radio and phone recording system replacement. And IZzyNet is basically voice over internet for our phone system. It allows us to use text directly to 911. We currently have a system that bypasses it, but this would make it much easier. And these are through the state 911 emergency program grants. So we do have 2 of those, and we are completing our phone upgrade, and the state has paid for 5 years of software for that program for the telephone upgrade. One of the notable increases in costs is a one-time 50% cost for a CAD and RMS project manager. This is split with SSD, and so this would come out of the 911 fund. The support services division, we are requesting 1 additional FTE. This would come out of support services and have no impact on the general fund. Support services is fully funded through the public safety mill levy. This new 1 FTE would be for registering violent and sexual and violent offenders. With the rebuild of the jail, they can no longer do the fingerprinting there. And right now we do DNA sampling and photographs. Our detectives do that, both the sheriff's department and the police department split that. And we would like that SVR coordinator to do that. Also a record supervisor as well. That it's the same position. They would coordinate the SVR and be a record supervisor. What that would do would free up the police supervisor that oversees that would have to do a lot less supervision of that division, and they could focus more on things we're doing within the police department. There's 2 notable increases in costs, and 50% for CAD and RMS project, like I mentioned before. And we're looking at a records and dispatch staffing study. We've had the same number of dispatchers for a few years. And if we're looking at long-term different approaches to community response, we need to look at how many dispatchers we would need to do that. And I believe that is the last slide. Since I cannot cycle through, that would be the last slide.
Thank you, Chief Hagan. Comments or questions from the commission for the chief?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Commissioner Ding.
I have 1 comment and 1 question. First comment is just I'm glad that you're requesting that half an FTE for the urban wildlife program, because I know we've gotten lots of comments about wanting to see that come back, especially because we do not want emaciated sick deer wandering around town either. My question was though, can you, and I know we've talked about this in previous meetings, but not necessarily a budget meeting, and just given how many new people are paying attention as of late, can you explain the CAD and RMS project and its impact for the city?
Yes, I can. The CAD and RMS system is basically the records management system for police, fire department does use it at times. The police, fire, sheriff's department, East Helena. It's all part of the public safety mill levy. And the CAD system is for dispatch, computer-aided dispatching. Our system is, I believe, 2001. So we're at a 20-year-old system, and anybody that knows software knows 20 years old. It does not do the things we need it to do. We cannot get the information when the public makes a request. We can get some information. Some of it's actually manually searching through there. So what we hope to do is get that system upgraded. That's a couple of year project, and it would be fully funded through the public safety. Be an impact to the city. But that would allow us to gather the data we need, be able to more accurately report what we're doing, gather that information through dispatch, through the police reports. It is there's much better systems out there right now than what our 20-year-old system.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Thanks. I had a question about that second new FTE and how it was funded. So it looks like it's funded out of Fund 219, the public safety mill. I don't think we got that in our packet, or at least I couldn't find Fund 219. So that explains why I couldn't figure out where that was being funded. And I don't know if it's possible maybe to get that at some point, but I think that answered my first question. But the second question I had was on the volunteer coordinator. I think it was in your goals perhaps about hiring that position, but that's an existing position. It's just been vacant. Is that right, Chief?
Mayor, Commissioners, that position was created last year and
okay.
by the interim city manager, and we work with the current city manager to get that. But yes, that is in FY21, hadn't been hired, working through with a new HR director and all those things. That is a position we just closed applications for, and we're currently screening applicants. So it is not a new FTE for 2022.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments or questions for the Chief from the Commission?
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Probably for the manager, actually, relative to both police and fire, both collective bargaining agreements are current. They haven't expired. Is that accurate?
Correct. We are still in negotiations.
Right, but neither are beyond the expiration date of their contract.
Correct. As I understand it, neither are.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Manager. Any other comments? Chief, we want to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Manager Hollishaw, you have the floor.
Last one is Nikki in the municipal court.
You have the floor, Nikki.
Okey doke. Give me a second here. And I think I want to. Let's see. And you can't see my screen yet, correct?
Yes, we can.
Oh, you can. Okay, perfect. So my presentation looks a little bit different because I have one of the smallest budgets. And so I went more into depth of our actual court, which may be redundant, but a kind of a good overview. Helena Municipal Court is part of the state judicial system and enforces law for the city of Helena, and the Honorable Ann Peterson presides. She was elected, if we all recall, November 2019, started her judgeship January 1st of 2020, the year that lasted forever. It seems like she has been here forever, but it's only been over a year and a few months. We process all misdemeanor traffic, criminal, and animal control offenses, city ordinances, and orders of protection and civil cases that occur within the city limits. When the city manager asked for our goals, I did the wildly goals that we may never reach, but we wanted to submit proposals for personnel position pay increases and title changes. We've been pretty stagnant for almost 15 years in the court. I have 3 clerks with a combined total history of over 60 years in the court. They, of course, topped out many years ago on their steps. We're trying to create a paperless system. We're looking more towards e-filing in our court, which many other courts do at this time. With the introduction of M-files, that's going to help us tremendously in getting that process going. We're going to continue to meet the deadlines for preservation and destruction or destruction of our archive documents. Work on cleaning outstanding warrants. I'll show you a slide later on of why that's an important issue, and continue to work on achieving compliance with our defendants. Our clerks of the court are diligent in educating the defendant on their charges, fines, restitution, educational programs, jail time, and community service requirements, depending on the charge and sentence. This is important in then completing their sentencing and paying off their fines, which goes to revenue. Clerks of the court will provide defendants with all the information they need to complete their sentencing, appear for their hearings, and communicate with the entities they need to be successful in adhering to the judge's ruling. Pretrial has been a great service for our defendants. They're right next door in our new space, so that's been a great asset. We'll continue to participate in all the training provided by the Montana Supreme Court, and we're hoping to be provided with our new software system that's been in the works for years, but COVID kind of slowed down on that, but we are on the list probably within the next 6 months to 9 months of getting the new full court system. We strive to make our process as streamlined and as simple every day for our defendants. I believe that my staff excels in our jobs, and all my clerks are cross-trained in all duties. So if one is absent or sick or vacation or whatever, another one can cover that process. We've also surpassed most courts of our size with our technology. During this past year, I've got a clerk that's worked very hard to bring us up to date with everything we needed to provide completely remote services in our courtroom. Some of the changes in our budget was the move of the DigiTicket contract from the HPD to Helena Municipal Court. We asked to take over that contract so that we could continue with the electronic processing of tickets, which makes our court way more efficient. We also had the increase in our budget due to the purchase of the M-file license, and then the increase in our rent due to the move. Those are probably the 3 most outstanding things. Other minor increases would only be due to inflation. I thought this might be interesting. This were the operating indicators, and I can provide past more than just these years, but these are the operating indicators for the year 2020 and then to date for this year. We only held 3 judge trials or jury trials last year. Most of these trials were settled before trial just because of COVID issues. People obviously didn't want to come and be in close quarters. My final slide shows the amount of outstanding warrants, a bench warrant, arrest warrant, outstanding fines and fees, and open cases. And before I get into that, I'll just say we've come across many hurdles in the 6 years that I've been here. Legislation has suspended our ability to suspend driver's licenses. This was a great tool for us to use to get people's attention to come in and pay their fines. It also prompted people who had long-standing fines that were outstanding for a long period of time, and all of a sudden they need a vehicle to get to work. They come in, start paying their fines, get their license back. Well, we no longer can suspend licenses. We also used to use a collection agency, which we can no longer do because they attach fees like all collection agencies do, and the legislation put a stop to that also. And we had a service that would also monthly bill our defendants. So you'd get a bill in the mail just like you would a water bill telling you what your fine was. They had also attached a small fee, which was no longer allowed. So in a sense, we've become our own collection agency. And in multiple conversations that I've had with the trainers in full court and different courts around the state, be them small or large, we're one of the only courts that make a valiant effort to get the defendants to pay their fines and fees. We send out a monthly letter telling them that they need to come in and pay their fine, but that's about the only strategy we have at this time. So you can see that there's large sums of money outstanding, and the little asterisks down there, there can be a crossover of funds, and other than going into every single open case and auditing them that way, it'd be hard to tell, but there is a crossover because bench warrants also have fines and fees attached. So those two numbers could have crossover funds within them, if that makes sense. And that is, oops, the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Comments or questions for Ms. Johnson?
Mr. Mayor, I just have one question.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if you could let us know, or if you have it, what the timeline is for the paperless system and the M-Files project, and what impact will that have for the court in terms of the folks you all are working with every day?
So Commissioner Dean, we're I can't give you an exact timeline because we're just working on the contract right now. However, one of my clerks has already got some of the documents that we'll be using in M-Files converted into the system that they're going to use. It's called Freebo is the name. So we've got some of our forms already designed to be pushed into that system. And then it'll just be a matter of communicating with the entities within Helena that we work with, and then outstanding communities that we work with, detention centers, outside attorneys that are outside of the city. But it'll just be a step-by-step process as M-Files is up and moving also. And I'm not sure what the whole timeline is on that. Does that answer your question?
Yep,
okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions from the commission? Ms. Johnson, how effective is that monthly letter you're sending us? And are you getting responses back?
So, Mayor, commissioners, we do get responses. We sometimes follow up with a phone call, but it's a difficult situation. Thomas has coached me through this. There's certain, we have to stay within legalities. We can't become a collection agency because we're not. So these are simply gentle reminders that you owe the court a fine. So it's as effective as the people want it to be. Yeah.
Okay,
Mayor, I have, I guess maybe a couple comments.
please go ahead, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Yeah, so I just want to say the legislation that passed that prohibits the suspension of driver's license is actually really good policy from a restorative justice standpoint. Those that are most impacted by those types of policies are largely very low income, often people of color who are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. I do want to say, and I think, Nikki, you know this, that the city has been very supportive of the municipal courts. And, a significant portion of your budget is driven by general fund money, right? It is not fines and fees. Nor is this commission or body saying you need to meet a certain requirement of generating revenue. So I appreciate the data, but I think that there is some implications of suspending license on particularly lower income families who need that car to get to work in order to earn a living to pay their fine, right? So I hope we can continue the conversations about restorative justice. I know that is something that's important to Judge Peterson, and I think something that's been important to this body as well. So just a comment, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments or questions for the administrator? Well, it looks like you did what you had to do because they're all pretty quiet. So thanks again, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners.
Back to you, Manager Hollishaw.
Thank you. I know it's a different process. Fund 219. Thank you, Nikki. Fund 219 was a question follow-up from Commissioner O'Loughlin, and Chief Hagan is here to answer the question.
Yes, thank you. I don't know why I didn't see it because it's even in order, so I apologize. I think part of the reason why I was thinking I couldn't find it is because there isn't any personnel services attributed to this fund. So maybe I'm missing it, but maybe you can point me to where, if we're ultimately using that grant for that new FTE, is it reflected in that fund?
Commissioner, there is a page in there, and it looks like page 209 of 383. There is the personnel. That's almost exclusively what that budget is used for, is personnel services.
Okay, so now I'm gonna have to find it again because unfortunately our binders don't have page numbers.
Right.
Messed up the last video, so sorry about that.
It would be the third page of the 219 fund.
I tabbed like almost everything but this, clearly this fund, and it's not in order. Okay, hold on. Okay.
Salaries and wages at the top.
So it's the 218 fund, is that what I'm looking at?
No, 219. 218 is basically the 911 that is funded through the $ per phone tax that every phone.
Okay.
Yeah, it's after 218.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So I was looking at 218. Okay. So that is the increase in personnel services. Okay. But does that grant, if I'm just looking at sort of what's coming in revenue wise to that grant, does the grant cover the cost of the personnel services?
So the grants are under 218. The public safety mill levy is the primary funding source for 219. That is the county's public safety mill levy. That's the primary funding source. And most of it is covering dispatch and records, salaries and benefits. All of the grants are in 218.
So this fund has a negative balance. How does that play out then, accounting wise? Does it require a transfer from the general fund, or is it trued up at some point? And maybe that's a question for Director Danielson too. I'm not sure.
We can go over the accounting methods. On the policy side, though, is there a question about the use of?
Yes, that account is not balanced. So what happens?
Would you like me to answer that, Madam Manager?
No, let's have the finance director, because it's an accounting function within the department, and it's a operations level question.
Yes, thank you, Manager Holoshock. It's the deficit in the new fiscal year is just from carryover spending from the prior year, and there is no general fund support to Fund 219.
Oh, right. Okay. So there's an ending fund balance. Okay. Or a beginning fund balance.
Yeah.
Okay. So do we, I mean, just kind of thinking long-term, and this is a policy question because we're adding new staff. Will the revenue from that fund cover the costs in the long term for those new personnel?
Based on my conversation with Chief Hagan, the county is supporting the addition of that FTE, and their contributions will cover the cost.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Chief Hagan? Thank you, Chief. Manager Holoshock, back to you.
Okay, the last part of the, I just want to summarize the questions we still owe you answers on. So I only have one follow-up question left, and I want to make sure that I didn't miss any. So the one I have outstanding is the percent change in general fund due to the increase in staffing. That's the one that I have outstanding, and I believe that Director Danielson was asked that by Commissioner O'Loughlin. And is there anything else? Is that correct?
Manager Harlow-Shaw, can I clarify the question? I believe that Commissioner O'Loughlin wanted to know just the percentage increase in police and fire, because in the fiscal 20 and 21, it's disproportionately lower because some of those costs were transferred to the Fund 290. And so I believe I'm confirming that she wants to know the increase in those two departments.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
From the CARES. Thank you. That's correct. Thank you. I knew I'd missed. Is there anything else that I missed that's a follow-up question?
Manager Harlow-Shaw, can I address that as well? So there were just a couple of items that we wanted to make sure that we addressed to the commission. Is the sidewalk program that was proposed to the commission, and then in addition, the Helena Citizens Council had also proposed some minor changes to their maintenance and operations, and whether we have not incorporated those changes into this version. So those two items still need to be addressed.
Excellent. Thank you. This is a great opportunity to talk about that. It is 6:30 though. I know that I want to be respectful of your time, and we're over as well. But we can bring us to the next conversation, which is the June 7th meeting, which is the introduction of the preliminary budget and in our schedule.
Yeah, we could move those to that.
Okay.
So are just to clarify, we're not doing any work session on the new budget that we've got tonight? Is that...
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Commissioner.
Yeah, we're not doing, just to clarify, and this is for the mayor, are we not doing a working session on the budget tonight that we received, Monday evening?
You were breaking up, Commissioner. I apologize. I didn't get it.
Are we doing a working session tonight on the budget we received on Monday evening, Mr. Mayor, or are you calling it for the night and we're not
No,
going
we're
to
not
talk about?
we're not
anything
calling it
else?
for the night. We still
Okay.
have general comments to make, and I still have to read us some informational only.
I understood we were still having more working session, but I want to make sure that I'm being respectful of your time, Mayor.
So Mayor, when is our next work session? And I imagine it would be in advance of of passing the preliminary budget.
It should be. Madam Halshaw, would you arrange that, please? Okay. Informational only.
We hold on, sorry, Mayor. We did not have one planned, an additional working session planned. So I want to make sure that you know that we had anticipated submittal of the preliminary budget on the 7th. So if we're going to have another working session, it'd have to be next week. So just to flag that for all of you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
As a special session.
Yes.
Yeah, I would support that. I mean, I think, you know, there's some changes to this document that we haven't talked about. I mean, pretty sizable changes to, like, say, Civic Center that I just have some questions about. So I would appreciate another work session since we really didn't get a chance to ask those questions today on this new document we got.
It will be arranged, Commissioner, and we'll go forward with that next week.
Mr. Mayor, could we as a commission agree that working session, we'll just do the budget. We won't do any other department updates or anything like that. Let's just make it, if it lasts 15 minutes, it lasts 15 minutes. If it lasts 2 hours, it lasts 2 hours, but we don't stick anything else on that agenda just so that we don't bump into these situations where, we still haven't even addressed a great deal of substance and we're talking about shutting down the meeting.
Okay. We'll discuss it with the city manager and move forward with that. Information only. Presentation of budget amendments to increase total appropriation for fiscal year 2021 budget. Do we have any public comments on this topic? At this time, the floor is open for general public comments.
Mr. Mayor, I have one hand raised at this time. It is from Kev Ham.
You have the floor.
Mr. Mayor, members of the commission, my name is Kev Ham. You all know me. I run Big Sky Pride, and we are getting ready to come to town July 11th through the 17th, and we have a couple of big events going on, especially the night of the 16th, which is Friday, and the day of the 17th, which is Saturday. And we've been trying to get an open container space declared for downtown so that we could have a large party that would allow all the businesses that exist here 364 other days of the year to be able to sell their stock into the space. We had this before in 2019. It did only cover the walking mall at the time, but it was a good test run for it, and we'd like to expand it to be from Lawrence and Last Chance Gulch all the way up to basically Miller's and Blackfoot on Park, so that people in the Friday night can go to whatever restaurant and bar they want to enjoy some of our very fine establishments here and still enjoy our party on the mall and not have to slam their drinks before they leave. We have run into some issues where I have been asked to get insurance for alcohol sales I am not doing. And part of the reason that I don't want to do the alcohol sales myself is because that then means I can only have one vendor, which means all the other businesses that pay a lot of money to exist downtown and make our city more livable don't get to be a part of this event, which I think is completely wrong. So again, I'm asking you to step up and make this happen. And I know that our institutional knowledge at the city has disappeared a lot in the last couple of years. And obviously we didn't have Pride last year because we had the pandemic. But any help you can give on this would be awesome, because this is going to be a massive event and we're trying to grow it to be one of the things that Helena becomes known for, that there is this great party that happens in town that everybody goes to and everyone's a part of, and it's fantastic, and it makes a massive financial impact for the city. And I need the city to support us. So there's been some weird little hurdles, and I think that having the commission behind it would be awesome. And I know we have a bunch of the businesses downtown that are, well, they were going to chime in, but they are, they have left early because your meeting ran a little bit longer than they expected. Everybody had other things to do, but you should be seeing emails from them as well. So hoping you guys can have a discussion about that. That would be awesome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I don't even know how to start a discussion, but we hear you, and I see Madam the manager raised her hand just now. Go ahead, Manager Hollishaw.
Well, and Mayor, I just want to note, we do have some other public comment too that have lined up.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
We could respond after. Yep.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Madam Clerk, do you have any other comments from the public?
I do. Mr. Mayor, next I have Dax Citraro.
Okay, you have the floor.
Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Dax Citraro. My family owns the Rialto Bar, downtown Helena. And I would second what Kevin has suggested. Opening it up just helps all the businesses downtown on the Walking Mall, especially coming out of this COVID-19 nightmare. You know, our revenues are down between 50 and 60%. From prior years because of the pandemic. And, you know, this is a good opportunity and a shot in the keister of our businesses by having this Pride in downtown Helena. You know, it allows us to actually hire more people, make more donations. And I think it's an absolute positive thing. And I would just encourage you to, you know, lift the open container so that we can have a great week of this, you know, and the more money we make, the more taxes we pay. And right now we need the money so we can give back. So that's my 2 cents. Please take that into serious consideration.
Thanks, Dax. Madam Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, next I have Sean Morrison.
You have the floor, Sean. Sean, you have the floor.
Sorry, I thought I hit unmute. I'm also in support of Open Container for Pride Week, and we're, you know, my perspective on this is a little different. My family is partial owner of the arcade building on the pedestrian mall. I'm also vice chair of downtown Helena, and I also work downtown. You know, we think that these events are great for Helena. They're great for our community. They bring a lot of energy to our city. And I also think that, you know, one of the unappreciated facts of Helena is that we are, in terms of Montana's population, very centrally located. And so hosting events like this is something that we can and should do more of. And to the extent the city can make it easier for different groups like Pride to do this, we should, because we have great economic opportunity here, being the center of 5 cities that make up most of Montana's population. Is an awesome opportunity we don't take enough advantage of. So, you know, I think the last thing I'll add to this is that no, we're right across the street from Rialto and 10 Mile. And when the city has allowed them to sell, alcohol to people who are consuming on the walking mall, we've had no issues. The only issues we ever have are with our people who are consuming alcohol they're not legally allowed to in the first place. So after hours, glass bottles coming from other places. So I would encourage the city to permit stuff that is being done respectfully and well, and it doesn't create issues for us, and we'd encourage more of that.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, at this time, I see no other hands raised and I've received no written comment on this item.
Okay. Do we have any other comments from the commission?
Mayor, I would just say maybe it's possible that we could put this on an agenda for a future meeting for an update from staff and also possible next steps. I mean, I certainly would support. I think this has been a huge economic driver for not just downtown Helena, but all of Helena. So I'd love to maybe get a sense of how we potentially move forward. And perhaps we could do that on, the next administrative meeting, perhaps.
Thank you. Any other final comments from the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead, Commissioner.
just on this topic, super excited for Pride this year, especially after the last year. So I think it'll be an awesome weekend. And I think Ken alluded to this, and I know the city manager had sent us an email earlier this week about the insurance being the issue, and who holds that insurance. And from what I understand it, our city code is where that comes from, the requirement comes from. But I'm wondering, do we have, and maybe the city manager might be able to respond to this, just so we are all, we can ask the questions before it's put on another agenda. My only concern with that is I don't want to push us out too long, obviously, because July is coming quick. And Big Sky Pride and Kev obviously need some answers sooner rather than later. But I'm wondering, what are the options? And I know you had mentioned that you were connecting them with some at MMIA, but I'm wondering if you can maybe explain what the situation is, and then what are our steps to help get it resolved so that we can, because I mean, I'm going to be very excited if I can walk from,
Thank you,
Ernie's
Commissioner.
all the way down.
Thank you, Commissioner. Madam Manager, when is our next admin meeting?
Sure. Well, we can answer that tonight too, just to get more specific about how we could solve this instead, if you want to, without having, because we've already come up with some ideas. And it has been the commission, I think, that has traditionally been supportive of having an open container on the outdoor mall just in general. I think the community's done an excellent job of showing that that is a real need and is an excellent opportunity for Helena. So that's the first. That's the first thing that I know we need to discuss, is open container, just as a matter of function moving forward to support. Now, the reason I say it in this way is that the only reason we have the insurance requirement is because we don't allow open container. So the second part is the commission can make a permanent or a temporary change to allow open container in the portion of Helena, and that would remove the need for insurance. Either one of those could happen, and removing the need for removing open container in particular instances could include large special events. So just making sure that the commission knows that is a way of passing an ordinance, and we can prepare that immediately for our next commission meeting. You could also, the most easiest, of course, is to direct me to ignore the code, but I don't believe that it answers the larger issue, which is that the code will always be a problem. And we really need to either address this special events permit, open container always in Helena or in portions of downtown, And then second on the walking mall, which I think is a permanent conversation that needs to happen too. So just putting it out there.
So back to when is our next administrative meeting?
Well, and while the city manager is looking for that date, I wonder if, I mean, in order, if we ultimately, if what you're saying is we need the commission to act, to consider an ordinance change, that's going to take, as Commissioner Dean said, a little bit of time. And so rather than it just being another one of these conversations during the admin meeting, like if there is some sort of, again, we're going to have a public hearing, right? So we're not deciding anything, but if we want to bring this forward to a commission meeting, can we give enough direction tonight to the city manager and city attorney to draft it up and begin that process, right? With whatever ultimately the staff believes is a good way forward, so that we can begin that process.
But if I'm not mistaken, did I hear you say we could have a temporary process here where we just remove the open container and just have it for that day?
It would be June 7th would be the first opportunity to start a process. The only way, Mayor, to do that is to do a temporary ordinance change. It doesn't solve the issue in the long term, which is really, this is going to happen every year.
Okay, so then,
yeah.
Well,
Mr.
in my
Mayor?
opinion, could we do that and then we deliberately try to solve the problem at a future date?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I was just going to clarify, and that is what Manager Harleshulk, you're recommending, correct? Yeah, okay, great.
Okay.
And I'll just say, I mean, there's precedents for this. I've been digging into other municipalities and they have similarly temporarily lifted their open container ordinance. So I like the idea of doing it temporarily and then revisiting it to determine how we move forward.
I'll move forward, correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we have any other? I think you muted. I saw Tom, Attorney Jordan was saying something, but he's muted.
Oh, no, sorry, Mayor.
Oh, do we have any other comments or questions from the commission? Madam Harleshulk, your
Thank you.
commission discussion and direction.
We will schedule a special meeting of the commission so we can have the working session needed on the budget and then move forward also with the temporary lifting of the open container for the special event and then moving forward for all events in the city where there is alcohol served.
Okay. Do you have any other comments? If no other comments from the commission, this meeting is formally adjourned.